Today, we're going to talk about worship. And so let's open with a word of prayer and then let's get into it. God, tonight, we're so thankful that we get to spend some time talking about worship, learning from your word, and spending time together. God, help us to hear what you're teaching, that you would reveal yourself to us, just like you did to Paul on the road to Damascus. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so to start off, I just want to do this right away. What comes to mind when you hear the term worship?
I mean, first thing is just like, obviously, music, singing, basic Sunday morning answers.
Okay, cool. Any other thoughts? What else comes to mind?
I think of like being surrendered, like not having anything else on my mind.
Okay.
Raising your hands up in the sky, definitely.
Okay, hand raising.
Yeah, I'm like, the immediate picture is like a sanctuary and being like, worship, music. But like, if you're asking me to define it, it would be like living a life that's respectful to God and yeah.
So a holistic honoring God life. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think the most important question as we get into worship, like we need to start off baseline, is who are we worshiping? So I think before we get into anything about how or what is worship, we need to talk about who are we worshiping. Here's what it says in Exodus chapter 3. It says, "But Moses protested, 'If I go to the people of Israel and tell them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name?'" I mean, natural, like you want to know who the God is that is sending. "Then what should I tell them?" And God replied to Moses, "I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you." God also said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you." So it's this whole thing of like, that God that acted in your past, in the stories that you grew up knowing, like that same God is this God, and that God's name is Yahweh. And that's what the Hebrew word there, like when it says I am that I am, that's Yahweh. We're just pronouncing it in English for that purpose. But notice that he tells them all to associate with the Genesis stories. Like these are the kids, like you grow up knowing stories of maybe the town you're in, or maybe if you move to a new place, they're like, we're known for this thing. Maybe you're in Valley Center and you know the silos, or I don't know. I just like, there's some things that you would know historically. Like for me, I grew up in Topeka, and we had the Brown versus Board of Education Museum and all those areas. So like that's something Topeka is known for. So the same thing is happening with the people of Israel. Like God is saying, hey, associate me with all those stories where God acted. Associate me with those things. And here's the thing. Names are shorthand for stories, right? Like when you hear my name, you might think of, Josh from Topeka, whose dad is Steve, who's married to Hannah. You have all those things in the back of your mind. Like for you guys, if I say Trevor Snavely to somebody, they're going to think artistic. They're going to be like, has lots of siblings, right? Like those things are going to be in the back of your mind. If you say Coy, they might try to immediately rhyme it with fish for no reason, right? Yeah. But like you're going to associate your name with, like for me, small portions of food in the camp food line. Like that's from this summer, right? Like we're going to associate stories with those names. And that's what's so important about the name Yahweh, is that the people of Israel start associating the stories they've heard and they know with this name. So now he's going to be the same one that delivers them out of Egypt, slavery in Egypt. Yahweh's going to be the same one that goes to the cross and is crucified. Yahweh's going to be the same one that shows up in the upper room on the day of Pentecost. Like all those things are supposed to be associated with the name. So that now when you hear the name Yahweh, you immediately go to all those stories. Okay? So that's what the first portion of this that we really want to hone in on is Yahweh is the name of our God. It's shorthand for all these stories, and we are worshiping this specific one. Okay? All right, so I want to take us through a survey of the scriptures, and we're going to go to different stories and get a couple different things that we're going to analyze and go like, what is this worship thing? Like, what does it mean? So we know it's Yahweh. Now where do we go with it? And so let's start in Genesis 22, verse 5. We get our first instance of the word worship, and this means to like bow low to the ground, to like go prone on the ground before God. That's like the literal meaning of it that we then translate to worship. So this is like that first moment of that happens in Genesis 22, verse 5. And here's where the context of it is, starting in verse 4. On the third day of their journey, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Stay here with the donkeys, Abraham told the servants. The boy and I will travel a little further. We will worship there, and then we will come right back. So Abraham is on this mountain. He's going up to go make a sacrifice to Yahweh, and he has the servants with him. They're traveling, and conspicuously, there's no sacrifice. There's no lamb. There's no thing that they would then kill and sacrifice on the altar to Yahweh. It's not there. And so he says, hey, here's what's going to happen. Isaac and I are going to go up. You guys stay here. We'll come back. And notice he does say we will come back. He doesn't say I will come back. He says we will come back. And there might be something there about the faith of Abraham that we kind of read right over top of. Sometimes, if we've grown up in the church, if you have or you have not, we grow numb to the stories that are in front of us, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you've heard it so many times that, like, the gory details aren't so gory anymore. And like the wonderful details aren't so wonderful anymore because you know how the story's going to end. So for a moment, whether you've heard it or you have not heard it, I want you to just throw it out of your mind and I want you to experience it for the first time. Okay? And this would be one of the most horrifying stories to read, right? Like, Kellen, you're a kids pastor.
Yeah.
You almost certainly have taught this to your students. Like, what does that feel like as you're approaching telling kids that a parent is told by God to sacrifice a kid?
They're definitely harder ones to teach, for sure.
Okay, so the story opens, and God tells Abraham to kill his second son, Isaac. I want to point that out, because his first son is Ishmael. So his second son, Isaac, as an offering to God. And again, resist the urge to picture the ending, if you know it. Resist the urge to picture the ending. I want you to hear it, and I don't want you to jump to the end. And I want us to read the next few verses in this story, and I want you to see what worship consists of in this story. Because there's going to be no singing. There's going to be no singing in this story. And so I want us to just make note of details as you hear them, okay? And we'll go through it. So starting in verse 6, so Abraham placed the wood from the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, "Father, my son," Abraham replied. "We have the fire and the wood," the boy said, "but where is the sheep for the burnt offering?" This feels like a horror scene, like if you're reading it accurately, right? And then it goes on and says this, "God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son," Abraham answered. And they both walked on together. When they arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up a knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, the angel of Yahweh called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Yes, Abraham replied, here I am. Don't lay a hand on the boy, the angel said. Do not hurt him in any way, for now I know you truly fear God. You have not withheld even from me, even your son, your only son, which is interesting because he still has Ishmael. Mm-hmm. Then Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. So he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering in the place of his son. Abraham named the place Yahweh Yireh, which means the Lord will provide. To this day, people still use the name as a proverb. On the mountain of Yahweh, it will be provided. So what elements of worship are present in all of that? So what did you notice? Just little things, even just like little things.
There was an altar, and I know when we worship, we go to the altar mostly.
Okay, so there's a physical altar, okay. Did they have any supplies with them as they went up the mountain?
Just the knife and like the firewood. And
okay. Here's some other things that are non-physical things. Obedience. There's doing what he says. There's an offering of some sort. So in this case, the ram, but early on we thought it was Isaac. There's listening involved in worship. So Abraham has to listen, otherwise he murders his son and commits an abominable act before God. Because the rest of the scriptures tell us verbatim, like, you cannot kill people as a sacrifice to me. That's not my thing, okay? So, and there's conversation. There's back and forth. So all those things are present in this moment, okay? So now the next question, there's two categories. So this is the other side of the category. What are the elements that are not present in this worship? What's not present?
A song.
Yeah, so no singing, okay?
No, like sticking your hands up in the air and, you know.
We like don't know the posture of Abraham, but he doesn't specifically
But
say.
Like not specifically like.
Yeah. You're right. And I kind of jumped on this. There's no human sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not there. So there's no singing, which I think is the part that we would find crazy as modern readers, right? Like when we hear the term worship, we're like, sing. Mm-hmm. What song are we singing? What's the set list for Sunday, right? Like we even like contextualize it into a service, right? Like it's not all about songs. So this is worship without singing. The other, obviously, is the human sacrifice thing. Like I said, like the rest of the Bible says you absolutely can't do that. In fact, other gods require that of people, and Yahweh specifically hates them. He does not like anybody who hurts somebody who is vulnerable. Like that is absolutely against Yahweh and his worship. I don't know if you know this, but in Judges, there's a judge named Jephthah. And in his story, he says, if I get the battle, God, if I win the battle, whatever comes out to me first, I'm going to sacrifice to you. And his daughter comes out. And he breaks down weeping, and he says, if anything else could have come, but I must do what I've committed to do. And it says later on that she goes up in the hill, she mourns for a time, and then she comes down, and Jephthah does to her what he's committed to do. And this is the thing that is so haunting about this, is that Jephthah didn't know his God. He was worshiping, but he wasn't worshiping his God. That's how you worship other gods, is you offer human sacrifices. You don't do it with Yahweh. Yahweh doesn't want any part of that. He absolutely has no place for it. All right, so before we move on, what's something there that sticks out to you? What clicked in your brain? I mean, it's a horrifying story, and then there's the Abraham story that starts like it's going to be horrifying, but ends better. And then Jephthah's story is like, oh, he got the victory. God gave him the victory. And then it ends horrifying.
I think it's interesting that he didn't know, he had faith that a different offering would come through, but he still walked through what he thought was going to happen.
Yeah.
He was still, even though he had hope in that something different was going to come of it, he still walked through obedience, even though he had faith for something different.
Yeah, Abraham's believing the whole time that I'm not going to have to sacrifice Isaac. I'm not going to have to sacrifice him. And that is powerful. Like sometimes God asks us to do things that we just don't understand. And we have to take the posture of I don't understand, but I know your character and I trust your character.
Right.
And I'm gonna offer my act of obedience, knowing that you aren't going to act outside of your character. And that's what Abraham does. And he's rewarded for it. He's known for his faith. Okay, so now let's go to Job. I know this is all the challenging stories all at once, but let's go to Job. And in Job 1, Job, who is a righteous man, is tested by the accuser, Satan, who comes, and he's the accuser. And Job was wealthy. He had a large family. He had lots of livestock. He had a lot of land. He had basically anything that you would associate with a wealthy person in an ancient land. Okay? That's what he had. He had all those things. And in a short period of time, it's all gone. It's all taken from him. So his kids die, his wealth evaporates, and the very next moment after finding out that all this has happened, this is what the scriptures say in verse 20. Job stood up, tore his robe in grief, then he shaved his head and fell to the ground in worship. He said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of Yahweh. In all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. So what did you notice in that moment of worship? Because that's listed as a moment of worship. He fell to the ground in worship. What did you notice about it?
I think that's interesting how, when we think of worship, we think of it as so joyful, and that is not very joyful.
Yeah, so it's grief-stricken.
Yeah.
He's in very bad circumstances. Okay.
It's usually, very celebratory, and that's not, but also just the emotional strength it takes to not blame somebody for all of this, to just take it as it is and just grieve right there on the spot and still turn and praise God.
So he's in bad circumstances and he still praises the name of Yahweh. Mm-hmm. That's a challenge, right? As we look at what our biblical definition of worship really is, it's hard to see Job's example and go, I think I get it right all the time. You know?
Yeah.
I know personally that when I'm in a moment of grief and heartache and struggle, that I'm not as quick as Job to do this. And I think one of the things that is helpful as I look at Job's story is Job does it all to God. He's not whining about God. He's talking to God. He's talking to Yahweh. And in our brokenness and in our grief, we talk to Yahweh. And it's a completely different thing. Because he can take it, right? Yahweh can take it. And it says in the scriptures, in all this, Job did not sin by blaming God. And it's really interesting that it's like he didn't sin by blaming God for it. That's wild. So worship is not based on positive circumstances. That's something we know now. If our worship has to have the right atmosphere, then it isn't worship. If it has to have the right atmosphere, then it's not actually worship. Now that is like a convicting thought, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like if I can't worship unless the mood is right or the setting's right or the songs are right.
Right. Like you hear often people being like, well, I need a couple songs to warm up.
Yeah. We, like Job, have to stay faithful in our trust in who God is, who Yahweh is. And he's given us every reason to trust him and actually live that out, right? So now I want to go to Revelation 19. I'm just going all over the place tonight, okay?
Love Revelation.
Yeah, it's my favorite. I preached on Revelation on Sunday. So here's what it says in Revelation 19. And the angel said to me, write this, blessed are those who are invited to the wedding feast of the Lamb. And he added, these are true words that come from God. Then I fell down at his feet to worship him. So this is John speaking. Then I fell down at his feet to worship him. But he said, no, don't worship me. I am a servant of God, just like you and your brothers and sisters who testify about their faith in Jesus. Worship only God. For the essence of prophecy is to give a clear witness of Jesus. Okay, so what happens? So give me a little summary of what happened in that scene. What goes on?
Messenger of God shows up. John tries to start worshiping him. Then he says, no, not me.
Yeah, exactly. Not me. Not me. Not me. Don't do that.
I'm just like you.
Yeah, how often is that?
Same job.
Yeah, same job. I'm just like you. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And so the Hebrew word for like worship, like we said, is to bow down. So John is literally taking the posture of worship in front of this angel. Not a good choice, right? Not a good decision. And this is a posture, that worship is a posture of laying or submitting our lives to the way of Yahweh. Like that's what worship is. It's to submit our lives to the way of Yahweh. So making our lives, our desires, our dreams, our decisions bow to only Yahweh. Okay? So worship is way more than like the singing or even the sacrifices that we see in the Old Testament. It is, in its essence, submitting every part of our life to Yahweh's way, to his way of doing things. Okay? The call is to bow to Yahweh alone, as Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael did when Nebuchadnezzar told them all to bow. Those three said, no, I will not bow. And they're thrown in the fiery furnace, right? Like they're thrown in there. And that's who we are as followers of Yahweh, as Christians. We bow to no one but him. So in light of all of this, we begin to see that every moment is a moment of worship. Every moment. So the question we have to ask ourselves, will we submit everything, every part of our lives to Yahweh? Or are we simply willing to make it just singing? What do you guys think about the term worship now? As we're closing session one, what's different, or what maybe seems more vivid in your mind?
Things that I've done that now show up after talking about what worship really means is like I go out in my backyard and I sit in the grass and I pray and just watch nature. I watch the clouds move. I listen to the birds, and that's worship, to sit and just say, God, this creation is beautiful.
To sit in a moment of reflective prayer and just submit your eyes even to see creation how God does is an act of worship. Okay, cool.
I feel like I spend too much time worrying about how good the singing is or how good the music sounds, and I get too caught up in that, and I'm not giving all I have to God because I'm too worried about that.
Yeah, it's a posture that I decide, not a reaction I have, right?